on the road. Everybody, you're so very welcome to us today. So for those of us here over in Europe, in Ireland, we are coming into our evening time. It's actually not a bad old evening here in Mayo. And to Jonathan, very welcome early part of the day for yourself. It's really, really wonderful to have you here. For anybody who's joining us that isn't familiar with ourselves, we're Grow Remote. We're an award-winning Irish nonprofit. We're in the space of helping people to access remote working, whether that's individuals, companies, or communities. So you can find out more at growremote.ie. John, I want to say a huge thank you for coming and giving so generously of your time, and to everybody for joining us today. These conversations are so very important. They're helping us to move the whole idea of remote working forward for us as individuals and for communities and for companies as well. So without further ado, John, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. And I'll just quickly start with your welcome. Of course, happy to be here. Thanks for letting me in the door, so to speak. And I was actually at a Grow Remote event in Tubbercurry in, I was trying to remember, was it 2018 or 2019? So while it was actually fun, a lot of fun to be there, it was a lot easier to commute for this event today than it was for the last one. So happy to be here, happy to come back again too. Yeah, of course I have lots of different presentations and slides I could run through, and we could do a death by PowerPoint thing. But the idea is really to like ask me any kind of random odd question. So I thought I'd tee up a couple of quick things. The bio's already gone out, so I don't need to repeat everything on that. But I will say, just as a point of pride, the book is just now out. The second version of the book is out. So as someone who's never written a book before, I'll tell you it's a lot more work than I thought. And I'm actually really proud of it. It does cover, and this is what I want to make sure we set the range of things to talk about. Yes, there's all the kind of mechanical things like I see everyone who's on camera, which is most of us, doing good lighting, good setup, professional backgrounds, friendly inclusion of family members where appropriate. It's all great. So that's all going really well. But you'd be amazed how many people don't do that right. So there's also then the next part, which is more human stuff, like team culture, isolation, burnout. How do you onboard and interview and hire people when they're not physically beside you? How do you deal with conflict when it's easy to do conflict avoidance? All those kind of human things. And then the last section is around what I think of as the wider topics. So like, what's the climate and carbon footprint of commuting, and how could you help tackle climate change just by having people not commute? And it's actually some of the numbers that come out of this are staggering, especially when you compare them to all the other things that people talk about, like giving away free electric cars and carbon tax for planes. And if you could just like cut down your drive, you actually have a bigger impact, and you can do it today using existing technology. That's one. There's workforce diversity around hiring people who can't commute because the commute is a barrier. There's a whole bunch of urban planning. There's a bunch of economic development. That's how I ended up helping write my first law in Vermont, and that's part of what I want to make sure we talk about here. Like, how can you revitalize an economy by giving incentives to humans, not corporations? And there's a whole bunch of twists and turns in the details of that. But those are the kind of ranges of things I thought we could talk about. But I'm going to shut up and open the mic and open up the floor and see who wants to jump in first, or else I'll just start talking and then you're all doomed because I won't stop. So that's me. Who's up?
Fantastic introduction. Thanks, John. Did anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question, or do you want to use the chat to ask a question? And I realize it might be that time of the day where people are starting to want to consume versus create. I'm going to ask John, I'm very interested in your background in remote working and how you came to this field. How has that developed over the years?
So how I came to start doing this, you mean? Or
yes.
So I'm a computer guy, actually, by training. If that wasn't apparent from either my bio or just from how I behave. Like the first time I came across a computer, I was about 12, I think it was. And that was it. It turns out, oh, you can get a job at this. You can go to class at this. I was like delighted. It was the fastest session I had with a career counselor in school. It must have been about 3 minutes. I came in saying what I wanted to do and left. And that's all I've done. Until we had an episode, probably about 15 years ago now, where I was in a company with offices, multiple offices globally. And there's this very big heated argument between me and an engineering manager of another team. And in the midst of this heated debate about something, he came out with a line that said, "It's not fair. You guys," meaning me and my team, "you guys all know what's going on because you're all here in headquarters. My team's physically distributed. We don't know whatever is going on. We're always out of the loop. We never know what's happening because we're not in headquarters." And he was really angry. And he's a nice guy. He's genuinely not angry. And it turns out, and I paused and I was like, well, wait a minute. My entire team is spread across the globe and none of us are in headquarters. And I had to pause there for a second. And both of us were like, wait, what? So how do you know? It's like, so engineering brain kicks in. We're both working in the same company. We're both leading teams of about the same size. We're working on about the same technology. We're working on slightly different parts of the problem. The difference was how we were each managing the teams. And I had a team that had the highest retention and was in the company. It used to be the worst retention for 9 years in a row before I got there. It had the highest retention. It stayed that way for 6 years before I left. And it stayed that way after I left for another 7 years until today. It's also really highly diverse. For a hardcore back-end systems engineering team, it was 25% female, bunch of different races, which people care about, bunch of different age distributions, all the kind of metrics that you would want a HR department would want to put up on a chart and say, look how great things are. We were doing all those things and they were all across 4 different time zones, no time zone being adjacent to any other time zone. So they went from Dusseldorf in Germany all the way through to Christchurch in New Zealand. And that started me down this path of like, actually, maybe I'm doing something here that's different. I've always worked in physically distributed teams. I've been doing it for 28 years. And so I started writing down what I do, doing workshops, and eventually ended up here.
I think that's amazing that you recognized the difference between what was happening between the two team structures. Is there something that you think led to that you were able to recognize, or is it just like what do you think it was initially that meant that your team were doing so well as a distributed team versus that other team? Like what led into that? I'm looking for something very nebulous here, but
no. Well, a lot of things actually, it turns out in hindsight, but if anything, I think the first thing was being hyper focused on how you communicate. I would use the phrase, we're very crisply organized. Everything was premeditated. Do I send this message in group chat or do I send it by a phone call or a video call or an email? And if the same message is being sent on multiple channels, which one is the right message? Because if you have an email that says that the project's got to be done by 5 o'clock on Friday, and you got a text message from somebody else that says it has to be done by 9 o'clock on Monday, and someone else says 9 o'clock on Friday, how do you know what's the right one? So which one is the single source of truth? And if you're obsessive about details and very, very organized, you can eliminate a lot of that thrashing. And the problem with that thrashing is it sounds very boring, kind of silly. But every time someone makes a mistake, they work really hard to make a deadline for 9 o'clock on Friday morning. And the person they're working with is on a much more relaxed schedule because they think they have all the way till Monday. This starts to erode team trust over time. You end up with people arguing with each other, not because they don't like each other. They're arguing with each other because leadership was not very clearly organized about how to communicate what's going on. And so being very obsessively focused on being crisp on communication was an important part of that. And I think the other part was being very personal, knowing that you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes, tell people when you make mistakes, tell people it's okay if they make mistakes, be humane, I use the phrase be a human a lot, like we're all humans and humans are a social species, so plan social time together and be respectful. Like, somebody there had a small kid running around in the background. That's the reality of life. Now, it can be disrupting at times, so you want to try and balance that and try to do your best, but it also happens. It's life. You get people who have to deal with like pets, other family members, power outages. There's a group in Texas right now dealing with a lot of snow. And they don't handle snow very often in Texas, so that's a big deal for them. So there's a lot of these realities of life that come along. And I think just being very focused on how you coordinate is important. And I'll just end with in a lot of companies I've worked in with offices, people were horrendously disorganized. And you just thought it was normal. You go to a meeting, you leave the meeting, and then as you're walking down the corridor, you're still talking about things you were thinking about. And then you go get a coffee after the meeting, and you can't remember, did we agree this time or that time? So you go back to the meeting organizer, but they're not at their desk, but you all can play the Sherlock Holmes game because the jacket's gone, but the bag is there. That means they've gone somewhere close, but they haven't gone home for the day. So you play these detective games and you think that's normal. And that actually all doesn't work for the person who can't walk down the corridor. So how do you organize that? That really, once you start thinking about it in that way, you start realizing how inefficient a lot of offices are.
I absolutely love that way of looking at it. And as you're saying that, okay, I don't have a lot of background in an office setting, but the bit I did, yeah, that's part of what was going on within our day. You spend so much time and effort figuring out signals within the physical space. And as you say, how inefficient and also not accessible to so many people, whether they're remote themselves or have different accessibility needs. I really like that framing. I think I'm going to be borrowing that for the future.
Sure. There's also an add-on to that too, if I can, which is it's extraordinarily vulnerable to the building. So if your company is set up that way, and then you suddenly decide you're going to move to another floor of the same building with a different layout, or you're going to move to the building across the street, or your building is closed because of a power outage or a sprinkler fire problem or whatever, all of the things that made things sort of work by the constant recurring and retelling of what's the latest update on this project. And then 5 minutes later, meet someone at the corridor. Oh, did you hear the latest on such and such? And everyone's doing this kind of constant storytelling, constant retelling and updating. That suddenly breaks if you can't go into the office for a day because of a power outage. And it totally falls apart if you can't go into the office for an extended period like COVID. And so you get companies that are like, they had to suddenly abandon the office and go home because of COVID lockdown. And they drown in Zoom calls because they're now having Zoom calls scheduled multiple times a day for the recurring storytelling. They're trying to recreate the office corridor recurring storytelling on Zoom calls. So what do you know? Everyone complains about doing 12 hours of Zoom calls and Zoom fatigue and how they hate this. It's like, you're fundamentally not organized right.
I love how you get to the point on that, and would so agree. It's been amazing how where we've had phone calls with a couple of people and they're just like, oh gosh, that's so refreshing. It's just, at least I get to give my eyes a break. I'd love to get your thoughts on documentation, John. And like that when you're coming across a team or organization who are very new to remote, how would you approach it as far as selling the idea or getting structure in place to help bring efficiency in?
Like, where do you start? First thing I'd say is don't make any big brash announcements. Like, I think when you have companies, like if you're working in a company, and I'm specifically going to avoid mentioning any company names here because I don't want to get into trouble, but if you're working in a company and the manager in charge or the VP of whatever comes along and says, okay, we're going to have this great new initiative, we're all going to do blah, 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 blah. Like everyone's who's been there for a few years has heard versions of that come and go with no actual follow through and no actual consistency. And they're like, oh, it's the latest management fad of the day. This is all going to be forgotten about in about 60 or 90 days. I'm just going to keep on doing my own thing. So I think it's really important. Don't get into making major announcements. Just start quietly and start small. Everything I've done has been, I checked with one or two people just to make sure I wasn't totally off beam. And then I'd start making small process improvements internally in the team. And each of the process improvements happen to also help people in the office as well, because someone comes running down after a meeting and says, hey, John, where's the latest? What's the latest about this particular project? Is it really 9 o'clock or 5 o'clock on Friday? I send them the link to where everyone has agreed is the place to look. And I ask them, look at the first couple of lines of that. Does that answer your question? I'm doing two things there. One is I'm not creating a new communication channel. I'm not encouraging the behavior where they keep coming and ask me. I'm trying to have them learn to look in this single source of truth. Item one. Item two, they may have a different question than I thought. So maybe it's not answered. I want to hear that. I'm not trying to just fob them off. I actually want to hear, did that actually answer your question? I'll sit there quietly while they read it. But if they read it and it answers their question in a couple of sentences, then great. They now also know where to look next time. So they might not come and interrupt me next time. This is helpful in an office, and you can start it today. You don't need to spend fancy money on toys. You don't need to make announcements. You can just start. Things like meeting notes, like instead of having people, nobody likes to be the meeting note taker. It's a miserable job. Like you don't get to pay attention in the meeting. You have to spend time after the meeting trying to write up the notes, and nobody looks at the notes unless there's an argument later. And then you're suddenly held up as the evidence in court while people yell at each other. It's like a high stress, ungrateful job. But if everyone writes notes together in a shared document, and then you spend a minute at the end of the meeting looking at the shared notes together, you don't leave the room or the call until everyone's looked at the notes and said, yeah, we all agree that's what we said. And by the way, we all took notes in different parts together. So no one's the dedicated meeting taker. We all like the accuracy of the notes, and then we send it out. Those would be the kind of small starting point things I would focus on. There's a whole bunch of them in the book, but start with those. And then start also looking at how can you rehearse not coming into the office for a day. So like, if it's kind of scary, I mean, this is kind of silly saying it in a setting where most people are dealing with lockdown, but if you're in an office environment and you've never worked from home, try working from a different floor of the same building. Try working from a different meeting room or a different desk, and see, did everything you brought with you in your bag let you get your job done? Or did you miss a paper folder on your desk or something else, a file on another computer or something? So those are the kind of test runs you can do first. And if they work, then you start working from home at least one day a week, every week, so that you're always keeping it fresh. And I put this in the context of long-term disaster planning. Like if you rehearse disaster planning every day, with the tools you have in your bag, then you can get your job done, if a sudden office closure happens. And I mean, COVID is one thing, but like I've dealt with forest fire problems here in California. I worked in a company when Ebola was first a big thing, and that was a big problem. Major protest marches and sports events, city lockdowns for those. Those kind of things happen. The question is, should your physical building be a single point of failure or not?
That's fantastic. I actually just made a note to myself here about like limitations of teamwork organized around a physical office, and it's so fragile. So yeah, I love that idea of like building, more anti-fragility into how a team or an organization works, Absolutely fantastic. Just want to acknowledge Dan's last question. Dan, I'll come to that in just a moment because I know that's a topic that John wants to get to. I'm gonna come to Renata's query first. So she just said it's great insights, and we're hearing that the hybrid model of time in office and time working from home or hub is what most people want post-pandemic. How do you create a level playing field so that those working from home don't feel out of sight as out of mind?
Mm.
Thanks, Renata.
Yeah, that's a good one. I will, a couple of things. The out of sight, out of mind is a real problem. It's, so it's not to be dismissed at all. You can watch it. It can actually be very dangerous. So be very careful of this one. There's a couple of competing pressures going on here. So one is, for some organizations, the culture is not very human. The culture is very about the physical assets of the company. So the companies will brag about how they have free beers on Thursdays, how they have these amazing chefs that come in and give free lunches during the day, or how they have very nice chairs in the office, or whatever, or they all get free hoodie jackets, or which is all, these are all nice things to have, nice toys. Those are nice toys. They are not company culture. And if you focus your company culture messaging on toys like that, sorry, somehow got muted. If you focus the company culture on toys and not on the humans, then what happens is when you suddenly don't have those toys, like there's an office closure, then everyone feels kind of rudderless. They don't know what to do. And if the office has been such a central part of the culture and you don't have any of those toys, and you don't have the fancy office and the cool, like the slide inside the office building and all the other toys that people can build, then people are like, wait, what am I doing here? What's going on here? It can be very, very jarring for company culture in terms of human contact. To me, the central mindset I wish more people had is like, a company is just a collection of humans. That's it. And if you don't take care of the humans, you're not interchangeable cogs, you're not interchangeable resources. Every human comes with its own little unique little API of how many innies and outies on what corner, which side, if you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. How do you make all these humans fit together and want to work together? People are not interchangeable cogs. And so if you focus on the culture of the humans, you can save yourself all that money on real estate and buildings and stuff like that, and you focus on the culture. And then the culture survives because the culture is about the humans who don't care if the office is open or closed, or they don't care if you get an office or not, because you're focused on the humans. I got on a bit of a rant there, but the question was about hybrid. If your company is all in one office or in offices with toys, it can be very scary to say we'll never go back to the office. So people who are leading large companies like that, where the entire culture is geared around the fancy offices and stuff, it's like, oh, we're all stuck at home. We all want to go back to the office because we all want to go back to life before COVID. I want to be able to go down the corridor, meet a friend for lunch, decide to take an impromptu drink after work and hang out and chat with friends. That's normal because humans are a social species. And you want contact with other humans. And so you can find yourself trying to boost morale of employees by saying, we'll all go back to the office at some point. We don't know when, we don't know how. I'm not a pandemic specialist or a vaccine logistics guy. So just it's going to take a while. But once we do, we'll be able to go back to offices after COVID. But if you do that, life is still going to be very different to what an office looked like before. And that's going to be quite jarring for people, down to, there's lots of stories in the news about Manhattan and San Francisco. If you've got tall skyscraper buildings constructed around the queue modeling of how many people can fit in an elevator and how long will it take you to get from the lobby to your desk, and you change the occupancy level of an elevator from 12 people to 2 people, suddenly it can take hours to get from the lobby to your floor. what's the point at that point? And so you get people trying to argue that you should come back to the office because that's the only culture they know. And you get people who are like, actually, being at home is easier because I have kids who can't go to school, or I have a sick family member I have to take care of and I can't commute. And so you get people who are leading, who are trying to balance the act in the middle and like, oh, we're going to try and do best of both worlds. You can work from home and you can come to the office. It's actually the most dangerous model because you really can artificially quickly create a model where the people in the office get recognized and the people who are at home don't. And so it's the one I like the least. And it's one thing to say working in an office is kind of like how managers work. Working physically distributed is an advanced manager model. Working hybrid is, I put it under a cautionary advisement for very advanced managers, and you really want to know what you're doing. Potential for screw up is high.
I have a particular bee in my bonnet about this as well. Myself and Renata would have talked about this before. Oh gosh, yes, because we hear so much of the narrative, because it's been, again, so much of all of this comes down to psychology. We've had extremely challenging year, and then maybe yes. How do you even start? And then people, like you say, are just looking to get back to pre-COVID life. So we start throwing out this idea of getting back to the office, or hybrid will work, without necessarily really stopping and considering how difficult it is. And if anybody out there is interested, I put together a very basic presentation on it, that if you want to start the conversation within a team or whatnot, it's there for anybody who wants to use it. Renata, thanks. That's a fantastic topic to bring up. Again, Dan, I haven't forgotten about you, so I'm just going to wait a minute that we move on. But I see Rihanna Carroll's question there, and I think it just fits nicely into the flow from what Renata asked there. So Rihanna's just said, just wondering how you manage work and communication flow in teams who are spread over a range of time zones. Thanks, Rihanna.
Time zones are hard. It's part of being on a round spinning ball going around the sun. So that's just the way it works. Being clear on, back to, remember earlier I was talking about single source of truth and the different communication channels. That's actually the root of it. I've worked in many companies where they'd say, oh, we have a follow the sun model, or we have like offshore support in another location. And if you have a problem X, you can just send over the email to them and they'll work on it when you're asleep at night because it's their morning time. And then you wake up in the morning and in theory, the work has been done and everything is a wonderful thing. I'd found probably well over 90% of the time I did that, I wake up in the morning to get an email that says, I didn't know what you meant. Can you give me more details? I'm like, great. All that's happened is the clock has moved forward 12 hours and now I have to work hard today to scramble to do this thing. I could have just done it yesterday. And so the root of the problem here is about the miscommunication between the different teams. And so being hyper focused about how you communicate, what do you communicate on, and when do you need to pass work over to somebody else? And if so, what is your expectation of what is to be done? What is your clearly communicated expectation of when you're going to get the answer back and how? And how do you know by talking to the person on the other side, do they have everything they need? If you give them 4 out of the 5 pieces they need to get the work done, they're correct to tell you that they're stuck because you didn't give them everything. But the problem here is that both sides didn't talk to each other to figure out, are you set? And again, this is where it's historically very, very sloppy is kind of an emotive word to use, but very disorganized, very ad hoc. And usually that turns into, you get slapdash results, or you get the person working really hard to build the thing they thought you wanted, which is so different to the thing you actually wanted. And now you wake up the next morning to something. So everything about time zones is makes it harder, but the same problem happens if you have 2 or 3 different offices up and down the same time zone in the same country. So if you had an office in Belfast, Dublin, and Cork, just to pick examples, that's the same time zone. And if you send a message to somebody in the Cork office and you tell them, hey, can you get this done for me? And then you go into 6 hours of meetings, it's still the same working day. You come out at the end of the day, you look at your email, and there's an email from the person saying, I didn't know what you meant. Did you mean this or this? Right? It's the same exact problem. And it's not about time zones. It's about poor communication across lines. And if you fix that, then suddenly time zones are not a problem. Like literally not a problem. And I've been doing multi-time zone teams for at least a decade, maybe more, maybe two. And like it's totally not a problem. It really isn't.
And such a key skill set. It's interesting, I think, as well. We've noticed early last year, a lot of companies, organizations came to us and asked about tools. And
oh yeah,
like, yeah, no, but what are your processes? Because the tool is kind of irrelevant if there isn't a process in place or there aren't good habits.
Right, and especially if it's a software company or an engineering focused company, there's the tendency to say, oh, well, we'll just buy another tool. We'll buy something else. Oh, it'll all be great if we all use X. And it's partially true that maybe X is better than the tool you're currently using. So maybe it does fix some things. But if you're going to switch to use a new tool, then unplug and turn off the old tool. Don't leave the company with like 5 different tools that you could all be using and nobody really knows what's the right one. Transition, make a decision and focus on it. There has to be single, clear communication channels. And you cannot mess with that. And if you look at organizations, like, we talk about distributed teams as like a new thing. There's been distributed business companies for hundreds of years. And this was back when you broke out the quill and the parchment and you wrote down the instructions. You gave it to someone who got on a horse. Like, you want to make sure your instructions are clear. And so how you communicate is a real part of the problem here. Tools, don't get distracted by shiny toys, and actually it helps to actually get rid of tools. Helps a lot.
That's a tough one for me. I do like the shiny things.
Yeah, I mean, go play with all the shiny things you like, and doing that, what you will find, that's part of your job as a manager, is you'll find new tools that actually this might be better than what we have. Now it's your job to sell that tool internally and do a culture change transition and get rid of the old tools. If I've worked in companies where we had like 5 or 6 different group chat products in use. Different teams use different ones. And God help you trying to communicate across teams. Because if I was trying to run all these different, I had to have all the different group chat products. And then I have to relay back messages back and forth across the line. Burn down the ones you don't like. Get rid of them. Sorry.
I love that idea of burning them down. Absolutely fabulous. Rowena's just commented in on this part of the conversation, saying it's so true in teams trying to go asynchronous without a single source of truth. Just wondering, John, would you tease out that idea? What is the single source of truth? Because this just might be a term that maybe people wouldn't be that familiar with.
Sure. Yeah, sorry. If you, I also want to make note, we have somebody we missed earlier. I want to make sure we're not skipping over.
Oh, don't worry, I'm getting back to Dan.
Okay, you have those. Fine. Good.
Yeah.
Carry on. Okay. Single source of truth. If you, my joke in this thing is like, if you have an official project manager on some project, and that project manager sends around a spreadsheet that says urgent latest update, and there's an Excel spreadsheet, and you get it, and you sit there and you open the spreadsheet and you're like, oh my God, okay, this is really complicated, all the things for this project, we're still due for 5 o'clock on Friday. What's changed in this spreadsheet since I last looked at it? This is now a giant memory test. You're not quite sure. So you think you got all the details, but you want to have a status meeting anyway, just to check. So you have status meetings because you're not sure what's changed since you last looked. And by the way, that email from that project manager is different to what you just heard from somebody in group chat, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever, saying that actually it's not 5 o'clock on Friday, it's 9 o'clock on Friday. And you're like, which one's, the project, you call the project manager in a panic and they're like, oh, I have to update the spreadsheet. I'll send another spreadsheet around. So another email comes out that says urgent, 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 and it has the update on it. And you play this game for a while, and after a while you start ignoring your email that says urgent on it because it's dumb. And nobody can quickly tell what's going on. Two sets of tools I like, and again, you can do this with multiple different tools. I'm not talking about product specific magic silver bullet here, but tools that track and show clearly anytime anyone makes a change. So ticketing systems are really good for this. So you'll see computer software teams use ticketing systems to track bugs and to track commitments to bugs and updates to bugs, but also like help desk products. There's a few of those out that track customer support calls and updates on customer support issues. They will track every change is timestamped with an author on it. Like Rose said this at 9:41. John said this at 9:43. And you can see these updates, which tells me when I open up the ticket, what's changed since I last looked at 9:40? Just these two things. Or actually, I can tell by looking at the timestamp, nothing has changed since I last looked. Therefore, I can just keep going. So those time-stamped identifiable source changes are an important part of it. The other part of it is everyone has to be able to use it. Means everyone has to have access. You can't just give accounts to certain privileged few. Everyone in the entire company should have access to this. And ideally, if you can swing it, your customers as well, because then they can see what's going on. You take out a whole bunch of tricky phone calls, depending on what's going on. Let's come back to that if people care. And it has to have really good full text search. If you can't find what you're looking for in a couple of seconds, the system's broken, not you. There's a weird human dynamic that people think if a particular physical tool doesn't work, people blame the tool. If a particular piece of software doesn't work, there's a bunch of research that shows that humans blame themselves, not the software. But it's a simple thing. If you're trying to search for something, if I'm searching in this pic, let's say I have a giant ticketing system, I look for like Rose Barrett in here. If I can't find all occurrences of Rose, including by timestamp the one where I last talked to her, if I can't find that in like 5 seconds or less, the tool is broken. There's plenty of other products out there that do that. So make sure the tools work. Then the last thing I'd say is when you're writing, it's one thing to write all these little blows as you go along in the ticket, but you also want to then send people. So if someone comes and asks me, hey, John, what's the status of this thing? Send them, don't write them an email back or don't give them a long description back telling them what's in the ticket. Instead, send them the link to the ticket. You're training them on how they can answer the question themselves the next time, so they'll interrupt you less the next time. Because some people will play this game like I interrupt, Rose is working on this high drama thing. She's really busy. I interrupted her 10 minutes ago. I'll wait another 20 minutes before I interrupt her again for an update. Well, I can sit here and just keep hitting refresh on this ticketing system, and I can keep an eye on what's going on. And it's better for my blood pressure if I can see an update from Rose every time she tries something that didn't work, hit save. Everyone who's watching didn't ask Rose for an update. We all saw the ticket update. And we have live cross going on. My best example of this was a project, and you have to do this consistently so people know what's going on and people know to trust the ticket. And you have to every now and then write in, there's a thing called an inverted pyramid style of writing for journalists. I don't know how many people here are journalists. Journalists, they write a headline. If you're interested, you'll read the first paragraph. If you're interested, you'll read the second paragraph. But there's this kind of inverted pyramid of who cares to read all the way to the end of the article. Most people drop off. You skip the article. You skip it if you don't care about the headline. If the first paragraph's not interesting, you skip on. That's called inverted pyramid. So if there's a big drama thing going on at work, how do you write in a way that's an inverted pyramid style? So the person who doesn't want to know all the gory details just wants to know, will it still be done by Friday or not? So every now and then put in an inverted pyramid update, like all production systems still down. We still don't know what's going on. No ETA for an uptime.
My blood pressure raised and I didn't fully understand what you just said.
It would mean people are yelling at each other. So normally. But if you do that model consistently, then people know what's going on. Or at least we figured out this, we know it's not this. People can start, it shifts the conversation. And I'll just say one as an anecdote. We had this as a team. This was a very, very serious part of the team. Like if you didn't update the ticket, I would come and have a conversation with you. or I would update the ticket for you. Like I would ask you what's going on, you tell me, and I'm like, it doesn't say it in the ticket. You tell me you're too busy. I'm like, I'll write it for you right now. And that helps train people. The other thing is that people are smart. If you, as a manager, tell people to write things down, and then you ignore what they wrote down and you ask them anyway, people at some point will realize it was a waste of time, and they're right. So you as a manager have to lead by example. So don't ask someone for a status update. Ask someone, where is the single source of truth? And then you're encouraging someone who's a young first job, 6 months on their first job, and they're like, oh no, the big pointy-eared boss came down and asked about such and such. I'll tell them. It's like, no, I want you to tell me where I can go read it myself. And they're like, oh, really?
Absolutely love that.
So that's what
think
that single source of truth is about. And if you fix that, it fixes a whole bunch of other organizational problems.
Brilliant. And thanks so much for going into detail on that, John, because
yeah, sorry, long answer.
I know I think hugely beneficial because not to assume that everybody, and like I've heard the term, I have even myself just a bit of an outline of an idea. We do it as much as we can within the team ourselves. We have a ways to go. One of the things that comes up for us is that none of us want to have to act as a gatekeeper, that the information should be accessible for as many people as easily as possible, and we're still learning how to do that. So not to say that it is necessarily too easy either, but it's these conversations really help to frame it and what we should be doing.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Dan, we did not forget about you. So Dan had asked, do you think there's been much uptake in local work hubs? He's actually interested in setting one up. And he's saying a work hub would obviously have a lot of benefits, but are companies really going to are going to rent a hub for their employees? For example, would a call center team in banking that wants a hybrid model, would they use that?
I think I'll ask you to read that to me again in a second. Let me try and answer part of it, and then either you or Dan can jump in and tell me what part did I miss, because I think I missed something. I think intermittently meeting together, like for lunches or something like that, or maybe even if you want to just, like, depending on the nature of your job, like some jobs require people to actually do like issuing badges for government workers, right? They want to make sure that the badge is given to the real person that really is Rose. So I want to see Rose standing in front of me. I want to take her picture. I don't want you to email me a picture. I want to know it really is the real person. So some things have to be in person, but a lot of things don't. And I think it's worth pausing and asking every time you're doing something, why are we doing this in person? So onboarding a new person, there's badges, but actually sending them a laptop in the mail, pre-setting up email accounts and accesses and systems like that, giving them a password on their first day or the day before their first day. Those are all things that work really well. Offboarding and people sending you back their laptop. You know, I've been doing this for years. I've never had anybody not do that. As much as people get all fretted up about it and say, oh, they'll steal the laptop and run away. It's like, it's a 3-year-old laptop. It's a depreciating asset. So first of all, it's not a lot of money. I mean, I don't want to be reckless with money. I would like it back. But people are predominantly good and they're trustworthy. They send back all, they'll send back their badge. They'll send back their laptop. And as for the co-working hubs idea piece, for like call centers, for example, a lot of people are doing call centers on VoIP. So you can have that you can do anywhere. I used to do, going back a long, 10 years before Zoom, I was doing VoIP on, a bunch of different other products. And it works great. And I would travel around the world and nobody really knew until I crossed over the date line and got my time zone math wrong and would show up for meetings early and late. That was my mistake. That was a human problem, not a technical problem. There are problems you do care about legally, depending on the products and companies you're at. Some companies and like government agencies, for example, It's illegal to have your family members see the information you're working on. So if you're doing something around, let's say you're doing forensic, let's say you're a cop and you're doing an investigation on somebody, or you're looking at criminal records of somebody because of a case you're working, your family members are not allowed to walk in and see who you're investigating. Like, that's a problem. So how do you structure your work environment at home to meet whatever the data requirements are, the privacy requirements are of the nature of your job? That's actually a thing you need to get right. And if you live in a house, like you live in a 1-bedroom house and you've got 3 kids, and you can't create that environment, then maybe you do need like a neighborhood co-working space of some sort. Or maybe you can arrange to go, like some people are doing around here, is like go rent an empty room in a house that someone's living in. If you have someone who's an older neighbor who's got, empty nest, the kids have moved out, they've got a couple of extra bedrooms they don't know what to do with, go rent one of those rooms in this house that's just down the street from where you live. It's kind of artificially silly to commute down the block or down the street to your neighbor's house, but it's a good way to create a secure environment to work from. And then if you want to actually socially contact with people that you work with, you can bring people together and hang out in those co-working spaces. You can have lunches, you can have mentoring sessions, training classes, those kind of like showing people how to do that kind of work. I personally think co-working space, small co-working spaces in towns, in smaller towns in the countryside, like neighborhood co-working spaces, I think they're very important for changing around, like showing how it's possible to work online successfully to people who've been living in the town for a long time and didn't think it was possible, or it's all a scam. There's no such thing as a really good job online. Whereas, oh, you're, I'll pretend, I don't know, but let's pretend Rose is also an accountant. I'll just pick on Rose for this. And Rose, as an accountant, goes and works, is living in a town and goes and works online in the co-working center. At some point in the conversation, Rose will talk to somebody else in town who happens to be an accountant as well, who happens to be unemployed and didn't know you could get a job online. Now you can take someone out of long-term unemployment and turn them into somebody who can actually work in the local community in that co-working center, both for an employer that's somewhere else. I think that being a culture change role model piece is actually really essential. And to do that, you have to be a trusted local person in a walkable neighborhood, going to a walkable neighborhood co-working space. Oh, and then just I saw the message go by here, Riona, the COVID restrictions thing. It depends on first of all, it depends on the layout of the person's house, actually. And it depends on the ever-changing rules of your local jurisdiction. So I can't give you an answer that's actually a real one because it's changing. Even here, it's changing month by month. People, if you have multiple entrances and you're going to it's a big house and you're going in the back door over there and you go into a back room and then you're leaving, that's actually not. And it sometimes can turn into people actually doing grocery shopping and supporting others. So it's tricky, but you gotta like watch the rules. They're changing, all the time.
I love Rowena's shared in there, because I was just, as you were talking, thinking, surely there's a startup somewhere around that. And she's shared here Airbnb of co-working from USA, Cody.com, CODI. .com. So that's really interesting. And Rena, I totally agree with you. You said here, I think my co-working hubs can serve loads of purposes, including individual employees linking into their teams remotely, and overcomes the problem of home working for people who do not have a suitable place to work in the home, because that's definitely an issue for some people. I recognize we're getting that hour flew, John. I would listen to you all evening easily. Before we do tie up, you have a lovely speaking voice as well. Before we do tie up, what is something that you'd love more people maybe to recognize and share around the potential of remote working for our local communities and our local economies?
What would I like to share? I think a couple of things. One is, I don't think this is a temporary fad. I think, COVID has certainly thrown out a lot of assumptions. It's hard to tell people that, yeah, you know, our work is too complicated. You have to be in the office to get stuff done, which is a traditional speech that I would hear a lot. It's hard to tell people that when they've been successfully working from home for a year or more. Yeah, especially when you consider generational change that's going on in the US. In 2016, millennials became the largest segment of the workforce. And sometime right about now, Gen Z, who come after millennials, will become the second biggest segment of the workforce. And they're totally used to these tools. So if you're not in either of these categories, you're the one who's having to struggle to catch up. But this is normal for them. Also, job tenure is very short. Nationally in the US, it's 4 years. For certain demographics and certain parts of the country, it's under 2, which means for some people, they've started and they will have left the company without ever having gone to your office because of COVID lockdowns. And that can, if you're an office-focused manager type, that can blow your head, but actually that's the reality. So just know that things are different. And we don't have a time machine, so we're not going back. It'll be different going forward, but we don't know what different. 1, 2, we're humans. So intentionally structure time to meet and talk with people. Be ruthless. One of the things I'm obsessively ruthless about is like, why am I having this meeting? Is this something that could be in a status update? Or is this in the single source of truth? If I'm having 8 hours of status meetings in a week, and I can look at my calendar to see where did my time go. And if I start seeing I'm spending time in status meetings, first of all, that's soul destroying for me personally. But secondly, it means we're not doing single source of truth. And then thirdly, it means I don't want to have time to talk with humans socially and get to reconnect with the humans I work with because I'm in status meetings all the time. So I throw away the human culture because I'm going to status meetings, solve the status meeting problem with single source of truth, and then focus time on humans. I would also say, like, especially coming from, you know, I'm in Silicon Valley, I'm a computer guy, so everyone's like, oh, this is all high-tech stuff. There's lots of people who are working online, call centers, HR people, onboarding, recruiters, lawyers, accountants, medical technicians, like X-ray radiologists who look at broken limbs and X-rays. They just look at pictures all day. They don't go to a hospital. And these are lots and lots of highly paid jobs online. And just looking outside of your bubble and talking to people in all sorts of other paths about how it's possible and how it works, I think is a really big deal. And the last thing I'll say is that incentives for humans, not corporations thing I said at the beginning. I think there's we've had this big shift in Ireland when I was there. It's going on in the States, in other countries too, where people leave their homes and their families in the countryside and move to Dublin or move to New York or Boston or San Francisco because they want to go get jobs. And you get this kind of brain drain. People either emigrate, like most of the people in my computer class did in university, or they move to the city. And you get these like towns that are dying because there's nobody there. And you get other towns that are just overpopulated. You can't build houses and roads and train tracks fast enough because people are coming faster and faster. And this, I believe, is the biggest change in urban planning we've had in 70 years. When we invented the suburbs right after World War II, we didn't have suburbs because nobody could afford cars before World War II. People lived within walking or biking distance of their office, and they had a job for life. Here, you only have a job for a few years. And so you built cities around this. And I really think incentives for humans, not corporations, that's the secret. That's what I'd love. If anyone here is doing anything on trying to revitalize smaller communities in Ireland or any of the countries, I'm not sure who's on this call, let me know about it. How can I help? I think this is massive.
John, you're definitely speaking to the right audience here because there's a number of our people involved in our chapters And that's exactly what they're about. It's community development. So our tagline would be making remote work local, but in reality, it's like Claire's currently running a project there in Longford to help outreach to students and get them engaged in showcasing their locale, but also educating them about remote working and educating other people about remote working and getting them connected with Grow Remote. And on and on. And Angela's sister, I was just on the Friday, and we're organising a Mayo-wide event to again promote remote working across Mayo. So there's a bunch of people here who have been absolutely integral to the work we're doing in Grow Remote, and that's just growing all the time, which is fantastic. So we might need to bring you back again for a further conversation with the chapters if you're available and open to it.
Yep. I don't do very well before 8 in the morning, but yes, happy to.
Awesome.
Very happy to.
We'll go later in the evening to fit with your schedule, without a shadow of a doubt. John, where else would we tell people to find out stuff about you? I really want to look at setting up a book club around your book, because that's just got to be read now. So if anyone here interested in that, let me know. But apart from that, where else will people find you?
So I have a website, odin.com. I'll put them both in the chat right now. I also just stood up one around the book, so let me send both of those to you.
Rowena just shared that with us.
Okay, never mind. Thank you, Rowena. And I think those are probably the best starting points. And then as for the physical idea of a book club or something like that, it's paperback. Some people read paper about it than others. I do. But it's also on Kindles and all those other things. I think it's available in Ireland. It's literally just out the second edition is just out like 2 weeks. So it's still kind of popping up in different places. So if you don't see it, let me know and I'll try and figure out what's gone wrong with the production deployment game. And yeah, I think this is huge. Like it kind of feels weird because it's not the big banner headlines. People are like, oh, we got X number of millions of dollars or euros to do bring X number of jobs here. It's like, well, what if you just quietly turn around and get 3 people in your neighborhood jobs? And then if they're happy, then ask them, each of them, to help mentor someone else get a job. It doesn't take long before it just accelerates. And just showing people how is the magic, I think. I think it's really, really important. I can't tell you how important it is, so I'll just stop.
I think that's such a wonderful place to stop it. And I think that I might actually take this last piece of your talk and replay it across different chapter meetups, because I think we need to be reminded of the fact that the work that we're doing, the quiet, slow, steady work that we're doing, is having huge impacts on our communities, our local economies and people. So thank you so very much. John, thanks a million for joining us. Everybody else, thanks a million for getting involved in the conversation. I will keep saying it, without John coming and donating his time, knowledge and experience, and without you coming to ask the questions, these conversations don't happen, and these conversations are having huge impacts on our communities and people all over. I'll be popping this up onto the YouTube channel, maybe not this evening, but tomorrow. And if anybody's interested in continuing the conversation, join us on the Slack. You'll get it on growremote.ie, and we have our virtual coffee. If anybody's watching this at the early part of the week, it's Tuesday 3 p.m. GMT every week that we meet for a chat, and they're lovely, varied conversations there. And thanks everybody. I hope everyone has a fantastic week and look forward to chatting to you more. Take care.